So we got to a bit of ice. We decided to cross this area, and Mum was in front of me, and she literally, in front of my eyes, just disappeared from view. She just dropped into the ocean like a rock. She just boom, because the ice just opened up underneath her. So she dropped in, attached to skis, sledge, boots, ski poles, everything. I leant on my sledge to try and get her, and my sledge tipped over. So I was in the water too, both of us attached, with the ice opening and opening and opening and opening.
Welcome to the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you unlock your full potential, both mentally and physically, to become the best version of you. Welcome back to an episode of the Prime Life Project podcast, a place to help you both mentally and physically become the best version of you. Today, I'm delighted to introduce to you Victoria Humpries. Victoria, how are we?
Very good, thanks. Lovely to meet you.
You too. Like I said, not our first time meeting. Like I said, we had a real brief conversation before, and I really enjoyed that conversation, which then has got me excited to speak to you again. And from our short conversation before, I was just fascinated by you as a person. And in doing more research into you, I'm just like, this is going to be good. So to sort of pre-frame this and sort of where we're going, talking about resilience and all that sort of stuff, which kind of, as we agree, nowadays isn't necessarily a skill that most people possess or know that they can develop. Can we just sort of go back to the beginning? Because I was very fascinated about your upbringing, because it's the kind of upbringing that I think every single person would like to have, but doesn't get. So can you sort of just take us back to how this all sort of happened for you and how your upbringing kind of led you to be and do the things you've done?
So as children, we were always brought up to say yes to everything. Mum and Dad never let us think that something wasn't possible. So the classic example I give is that if we saw a tree and we would be like, can we climb that tree? Most parents would be like, oh, well, be careful, it's dangerous, and all those kind of things. And I'm guilty of that as a parent. But my parents would be like, yeah. And if we then said, well, what if we fall out? Well, learn not to fall out, or does it really matter? And that sounds flippant, as if they're uncaring, but really what it was all about was you can try everything, regardless of whether you're male or female, doesn't matter if you're the oldest or the youngest. Always say yes, try everything, because you never know what opportunities might come out of it. It was very much the ethos. Equally though, if we said we wanted to join a new club, I don't know, let's say I wanted to join the football club next term, they wouldn't let me give up after one session. You had to commit and try, because again, something may be difficult to begin with, but then you may grow into loving it. So yeah, it was a mindset of just try everything, because why not? What's the worst that can happen?
I think that's really interesting, because especially just thinking back to my childhood, there's so many things where I didn't want to do them. I thought I wanted to do them. And then you kind of start and you're like, I don't like this. But I just want to mention there, it's not that I necessarily didn't like it. Just thinking back, it's because it was really uncomfortable, or I wasn't very good at it. So actually just to be like, whatever decision you can make any decision you want. However, you kind of have to see it through for at least 5, 6, 7 sessions to actually know if you do or don't like it. Because I think nowadays, when it comes to anything, whether it's like new relationships or new job, or just try new things, exactly, they don't want to try and persevere with it to see if they actually do like it. They get a little bit uncomfortable and like, I don't like this. Let's just go back to this sort of comfort zone. And actually, the fact your parents kind of cultivated that, I think that's absolutely fascinating. But was there a downside to it?
Oh, yes. Because even now as an adult, I say yes to everything and think, oh, God, why have I said yes? Or that's really difficult and uncomfortable and horrible. But, generally, I don't think there is actually a downside. I mean, I'm not condoning doing dangerous things. If they said, do you want to jump off a 10-foot wall? They wouldn't have encouraged those kind of things. It was so no, there really wasn't a downside. We failed loads, we cried loads, we hurt ourselves loads, we fell over loads. Did it impact me? No, not really. Didn't mean I liked it. It doesn't mean that I have some amazing, perfect attitude to life now. Oh my goodness, no. When I go out on a run, the first 2 miles, I want to stop the whole time. I spend the whole 2 miles, come up with excuses as to why I should stop. I've got a blister, it's raining, it's cold, I've got a meeting, but you get through it and suddenly you love it. So
I think that's the thing, isn't it? There's that self-talk, like being aware of it. And it's almost like calling yourself out on the BS. Like you start to make excuses for anything and everything.
Yes.
It's just like, oh, I want to start this thing, but I'll do this instead. Or I said I want to go out, but it's raining, or whatever it is. And it's just always an excuse. And I find
it's realizing, it's realizing that having that mindset is normal. People think, because on social media, all we see is someone who's strong and invincible and successful. You don't hear those conversations. And it's normal to have that self-doubt. It's normal to question yourself. And that's the bit we need to tell everyone is normal. And I think we would solve so many issues of this self-doubt, imposter syndrome, if everyone realized that's just every human. Kelly Holmes, David Beckham, they probably all think those things.
But isn't it interesting? Because it's like everything that I say on social media at the minute. You see the end result. So I said, you see all these motivational speakers and they're doing all this stuff. Like, for example, David Goggins, like, I don't really know much about him, but again, he's very much, just talks stuff, psychs himself up. But again, I may be wrong because I've not studied him that much. I'm using him as a prime example. But I'm not sure how much he talks about how hard it was necessarily at the start. I know the place he does. I think I actually heard some stuff like when he was actually building it up, but that self-doubt, all that sort of stuff, and how he sort of overcame it. I think he actually might be one of the ones that does talk about it, so probably a bad example, but most people don't. They don't actually talk about the fact of, right, how you are right now with that self-doubt, that negative talk, that was me, that is normal. However, this is how you overcome it, and this is what's led me to be here. There's that not with that conversation. It's interesting we're talking about this because I was just talking to Mikey off air about this. I was in a school 3 days ago with the quote unquote naughty kids, troubled kids, blah, blah, blah. And I've been talking to them for an hour and they were just absolutely engrossed. And at the end of it, when these kids talk about thoughts, controlling your thoughts, emotions, all that sort of stuff, like attitude, discipline over motivation. And the kid looked at me at the end. The last question he asked was, if this is so well known, why are we not taught it in school? And I just went, that is a fantastic question. And I basically went off on a 10-minute rant about it, being like, I don't actually know the question, mate, so I don't know the answer because it should be, just like you're saying there. If you can learn all of these things to understand it is normal, but actually get inquisitive and curious about that voice inside your head, rather than just taking it for granted that you are a failure, that you are a loser, that you are all this stuff. How many more millionaires, entrepreneurs, philanthropists would we actually have in the world?
Exactly. And I just think, I work in education. I love everything about the education world, but I don't believe the education system across the world, not just in the UK, equips our young people with the skills they need. It's all about success, and success equals A levels, GCSEs, university, apprenticeship, whatever. It doesn't allow students to be successful by just trying something and failing. Failing is success because it means you actually tried. Better to fail and have tried than not to fail and not have tried. And so I think if I had my way, I would have a degree in those skills, that those kind of understanding how we all work and allowing ourselves to try things.
So you mentioned failing. Let's sort of stay back with your childhood, because I think this is absolutely fascinating when I found this out. Absolutely brilliant. And I want to sort of dive into this a bit deeper than what I heard another podcast going with you. Can you talk about your big failure from when you were at secondary school? Because again, this will kind of shock a lot of people. And I think it's really good to unpick this. Can you sort of share the story and then we'll kind of unpick it?
Yeah. So I was head girl, so the kind of, everyone at the school expected you to succeed in life. I had offers from British Rail, as it was then, from Ovarup, who were building the Channel Tunnel, for sponsorship to go to university, to read engineering. Everything was great. I was successful. And I failed my A-levels, all of them. And I don't mean failed them with an E or anything. I got what's called 2 N's and a U. An N is a near miss, which was something like under 20%. And a U was unclassified, meaning there wasn't enough of me even to attempt to mark. We're talking disaster. The whole world implodes, your pride, everything. Interestingly, the first reaction of everyone was, oh, are you going to sue the school? well, no, it's not the school's fault. I mean, everyone played a part in it, but it's not the school's fault at all. What it was, when you boiled down to it, was I was very, very young for my year, so I was mentally not mature enough. I ignored the advice I'd been given. I didn't do the subjects everyone wanted me to do or suggested I did. The school probably wasn't the best at science, but ultimately all of that's irrelevant, because again, going back to my parents, they could have, made me feel awful for weeks and weeks and months and all those kind of things. I could have just curled up in a ball. But they said, for 24 hours, we're going to be cross. You can be upset. You can mope. You can be whatever it is you want to be. But 24 hours time, we look forward. Doesn't mean we ignore what's happened. We can learn from it. But in 24 hours time, we pick ourselves up and we make a new plan. And that plan could be, go to sixth form college. It could be continue with your plans to, so I had a job to go and teach for a year over in Canada, or you want to go and do something completely different. What do you want to do? But for that 24 hours, it gave everyone time, going back to what we said earlier, to go and have all those thoughts and then move forward, not ignoring it, but very pragmatic. There's nothing we can do. It's happened. What can we take from it? Mindset. And at the time, it was obviously wasn't the greatest moment of my life. But I think what it taught me, well, I went back after my year in Canada, and I then spent 8 months in a sixth form college, and I got A's and B's with different subjects. So it taught me that I wasn't completely stupid. I just had done the wrong subjects and I wasn't particularly passionate about them. But also it taught me there's always another option. There's always a way forward. It may not be the route you planned.
Did you feel pressure? Did you feel a lot of pressure as well at that age? The fact of you had all these scholarships and it's like you're expected, because again, and this is the thing, like clearly, yes, you say you picked the wrong subjects, but there would have been signs before you were going in there that you were going to fail these exams. So it's not a case of you were, again, quote, unquote, stupid or anything like that. You clearly are just bombed the exams for whatever reason that was. Did you feel a sense of pressure then? And then when you sort of mentioned about there, like, I'm not stupid, what was your, looking back, obviously, I know back in, like, we're talking how long ago it was, mental health wasn't a big thing as it is now, but what was your mental health actually like at that time? Because to have all that spotlight on you to be like, you're so smart, you're going to do this, blah, 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 and then to then not even just fail, as you said, bomb, how did that actually affect you mentally?
It was such a whirlwind that week when it all went wrong. I suspected something was going to be wrong, but even I didn't think it was going to be that bad. In a bizarre way, it was so bad, it almost made it easier, because there wasn't like a halfway house, that there were no doors open to me really at that point. But to go back to your exact question, the mental health, I don't think it was ever an issue, ever at risk. Again, because my parents, we allowed ourselves those 24 hours of being cross, angry, upset, whatever. But after that, I never felt they were embarrassed by me. I was the first child, the oldest grandchild, oh God, it just, everyone was like, oh, Victoria's going to do really well. It was mortifying. But I was never made to feel like I had let anyone down. It was right, okay, well, what are you good at? Let's focus on something different. And yes, so I don't think mental health ever was at it. And if anything, it's flip it, and it's given me this superpower. Mm-hmm. That was not much worse can happen from a young person's perspective.
No, I was very curious with it, because like I said, my understanding of this is why I kind of wanted to go back and talk about your upbringing before we got to this, because of the fact of you try, you fail, all sort of stuff. This is why, again, because that would have been disastrous for most people listening to this. Like, that would have absolutely broken me. And again, because I noticed
my son's doing his A-levels at the moment, and it happens. I'm like, oh my God, I hope it won't. I don't think it will. But yeah. I
think it's just so interesting, the power that your parents clearly had to sort of like hold that space of, it's not the end of the world, it's okay, right? You can feel these things, it's very valid. However, how we're going to fail forward, like how we're actually going to do something about this. Now, this is where things get interesting, because obviously one of the biggest things that you've done in your life, well, a whole host of the things, is going to the Arctic, which I think is bizarre. So this kind of why I wanted to pre-frame doing this, because to have the mental strength to go and do something like this, I think is absolutely fascinating. So I kind of wanted the audience to get an understanding of where this kind of resilience mindset had come from, because it wasn't something that you kind of cultivated throughout your later life. It was something that was almost ingrained in you. So how did you end up there? Because it's a bit of a bizarre story of you being in London and a newspaper. So again, how did this all happen? Because when you explained it, I was a bit like, I can't imagine doing anything as crazy as that. So can you just talk to me about that?
Yeah. So after my failed A levels, I had a completely normal 5-6 years. You know, I did take new A levels. I went to university. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Managed to get one of the graduate training scheme jobs at M&S. Then I went into recruitment for a bit. And, you know, I was just on the bog standard conveyor belt of your career. I was living in London, having a good time. And I was on the tube commuting to work. And in those days, everyone was reading their newspapers on the tube. And I saw an advert, and it literally said, women wanted to walk to the North Pole, no experience needed. And I am not sporty. I'm outdoorsy, but I'd never been in an A, B, or even C team at school. So, you know, I'm not a gym bunny, sorry, by any stretch of imagination. I'd never dreamt of going to the Arctic, apart from the fact it has polar bears and Father Christmas. I didn't really know much about it. But something in me, it was going right back to that childhood, was, well, why not? You know, worst that can happen, I apply and they reject me. Or
I mean, the worst that can happen is you go there and you get stuck in the middle of the North Pole. That would be my thing. That's for me straight back. That's the worst that can happen. But did you mind not even go there? Was there any? But again, during you read that, was there any? Did that even cross your mind? Because normally people would be like, "What's the worst that could happen?" And they'd be like, "Oh, not big." But then something big would come up that would kind of deter them. Was there any at that point when you just saw the article? Had you thought of any of the negatives at all?
Yes. But equally, again, it's always, and it makes me sound, just hearing myself, it sounds awful, but I don't ever see the big challenge. I always see each element of each challenge. So it's blinking, freezing up there. Okay, well, I'll make sure I wear the right clothes. I don't like being uncomfortable. Well, it's only for 8 weeks. I might miss my wine. Well, it's only for 8 weeks, you know. So I suppose I break each element down. It doesn't mean to say that I enjoy the discomfort or the cold at all. I hate it. I loathe it. But I suppose every objection in my head, I can always find, if I'm motivated and something has piqued my fancy, I will find an argument.
But that's what most people don't have, because that's the key thing. That's what people do not possess. What they see is an obstacle when it comes to starting that business or go for that promotion or whatever it is. And they won't be able to logically work back and be like, okay, well, how am I going to solve this problem?
Because they see it as an obstacle so as a big wall rather than as a pebble. And that wall is made up of 1,000 pebbles. So go past the first pebble, go past the second pebble. But again, I keep on saying, I don't think these thoughts all the time. I have that 5 minutes of, oh my God, that pebble's too big. But I get over that. But yes, it's definitely how you see the obstacle. What size do you see that obstacle to be, really?
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Someone like yourself, you see little pebbles. Most people don't see pebbles. They just see a rock, a slab, a huge thing, and they don't realize. And this is where people get stuck, which again was so fascinating to talk to you today, because again, your mindset around this, as you sort of said, you talk yourself out loud and you're hearing yourself say that. I don't think it is normal, but I think it should be normal. But this is the point. This I want to talk to you about it, because people need to understand that successful people and people have achieved something, again, because success, it doesn't have to be monetary. Like, you're very successful. You've literally done stuff that people dream of, like just all this stuff is like, you've gone and done it. But as you very, very clear, you're just a normal woman. You're not superhuman. You've not got a super sporty background. You haven't had to overcome some traumatic thing to build this resilience. You just had a very, again, I say
very
normal,
easy
yeah,
upbringing.
yeah, easy, but easy in the sense of you had that amazing support network around you. And again, your parents deserve so much credit for actually cultivating that, because that's such a hard skill to really do that right. Like, yeah, I'm not a parent, but again, being around people that are parents and
It's
having
hard.
young kids, it's so hard to actually do that. So again, kudos to them. But this is what I'm trying to get to, because again, you've developed this throughout all the things you've come against, and it's just letting people be aware that there is a different way. It's just changing your perspective on that problem. Okay, so I've got this thing, right? Well, what is it made up of? How many pebbles is it? And how can I just move one pebble at a time and just keep moving forward each day? And I think that's such a powerful thing. Now, this is also an interesting thing, because when it comes to you training to go to the North Pole, I imagined it'd be very, very physically demanding, and I'm sure it was. But at the start, you said that wasn't what they were interested in. So what were they interested in, and why was that so important?
So they weren't, yeah, as you said, they weren't remotely interested actually in the physical prowess. They almost didn't want ex-military. They didn't want gym fanatics, because the Arctic, everyone thinks the Arctic's made up of a lovely big white lump, flat white lump of ice, like Antarctica is made up of, you know, a solid bit of ice or solid bit of land covered in ice. The Arctic is basically a floating ice flow, but thousands and thousands of ice flows. They're all pushed together by this pressure. You're not always aware that you're walking from one ice flow onto another ice flow, but it's just on a ginormous raft of ice flows. And when you are walking, these ice flows are moving without you realizing, because they're on the sea, they're drifting. Because of that, the Arctic, there is no map. There's no constancy. There is no plan in the Arctic. You don't know what's going to happen next. If you go walking in the countryside in the UK, you spot a house, a tree, a pub, or whatever it is in the distance, you walk towards it knowing that that will still be there at the end of your journey. In the Arctic, nothing is constant, not even for a minute. Our tent door, we would put it up every night, and each morning it would be facing a different direction. At one point, for 3 days, we walked north. We were obviously heading north. We covered really good mileage. And at the end of the 3 days, we had drifted 30 miles south, because the ice flows that we were on were drifting faster than we could walk north. We weren't aware of the drifting. You're not aware of the movement. But therefore, if you are someone who has a plan and nothing will deviate you from that plan, and if there's an obstacle in the way, you break down and give up and want to go home, you would not survive in the Arctic. It's not about coping with minus 40 degrees. It's about coping with constant ambiguity, constant change. Plans change second by second. You can't, if you're in a meeting or if you are making any plans in life, we're always told, well, research. You know, at school, we're always taught research, get all the data before you pull together your evidence. Or in a meeting, we'll have millions of meetings in our offices before we come up with a strategy. That's brilliant if you've got the time and the data isn't going to constantly change. In the Arctic, you get to an obstacle. In our case, that would be either a big pressure ridge, which is like a massive high wall of ice, or a lead, which is like a big river of open water. You would get to it. If you sat down for an hour to plan how you would get around that obstacle, it would have changed. So you have to make quite quick decisions based on what data is available. And if you are someone who, when that decision is wrong, and they were wrong the whole time, basically, because everything keeps on changing. If you are someone who gets very upset when that decision is wrong, or as we took it in terms to lead, if you were thinking, oh, everyone thinks I'm useless, then you would struggle. Now, it doesn't mean we didn't all think those thoughts, but it's how you move forward. So really what they were looking for in the Arctic was the people who have that mindset to cope when things go wrong. It doesn't mean they like it. It doesn't mean they don't think those self-doubt thoughts or those it's cold and horrible thoughts, but they were looking for people who had the mindset to be able to overcome and keep going, because the fitness was almost irrelevant. I mean,
Did they teach you anything about that? Because that's a really interesting, like I said, the way you're thinking about this. First of all, the fact of if I'm walking in those temperatures, I can deal with that. I'm warm, I'm fine. But I'm walking north, and then you then tell me that actually I've deviated 30 miles south. My head would probably roll off. So just think when you're saying that, even me, and again, I'm very logical. Like I'd be like, I've just wasted all that time, energy, and effort.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, so as soon as you said that, I'd be like, okay, well, that's me out. I couldn't do this because all the other stuff I can deal with, but just knowing that I've done something and gone the complete opposite direction, my brain can handle it. I'd be like, no, like what? Like, but all the other decisions stuff, I think it's fascinating the fact that they didn't really teach you about any sort of this mindset. So you almost like had to have it built in because, as you sort of said there, a lot of people don't like to make decisions. They want other people to make the decisions for them. So then if it goes wrong, they've almost got someone to blame rather than with themselves. It's a real, it's an interesting, I think there's a few things with humanity that I've noticed. And again, from reading old books and looking at where we were to where we are now, I don't think people can critically think. I don't think people like to think for themselves. I don't think people like to take responsibility or make decisions. Accountability. And I think it's a really interesting thing. And it's something that I've noticed, all of those things I've struggled with myself. And I've noticed that once I've taken control of that, become aware of it and done something about it, my life has substantially become better because you're not relying on other people. So how did that then feel? As you sort of mentioned, you're at the front of this group. Did you feel the pressure? Did you notice the pressure? What was, were you having the dialogue with yourself? Like, how did you keep yourself in that good frame of mind, knowing that you're walking into something you're not quite sure of, and you're going to have to make decisions that ultimately could kill people if you get it wrong? Like, how did you deal with that?
There were two elements. So one, while we were training for 3 weeks before we went up on the ice, and obviously that training was quite technical, you know, how to live, how to survive, how to cook, how to put your tent up, etc. But actually, reflecting back on it, it was all about building trust and communication. So that once you were up on the ice, when you came to the obstacle or you made a decision that was wrong, if you were in charge that day, you, the leader, didn't think, couldn't open up and say, okay, I made the wrong decision, or I still don't understand why that went wrong, or you were able to express yourself was the most important thing. We were taught to communicate, because actually in an environment like the Arctic, not communicating can lead to life or death. You've got to trust each other. Doesn't mean you agree with, like each other, but you've got to trust each other to be able to be open and honest. And this applies to school and to working life. And I think the biggest problem businesses and schools have is culture. Bosses often say, oh, yes, we empower our staff. No, you don't. So you've got to be able to trust, you've got to be able to communicate. And then the most important thing that we were advised to have was a 5-minute moan. And I've alluded to it already, really, but when something goes wrong, 5 minutes, you can moan. You as the leader can think, I'm useless, I should have done this, they all think I'm awful, why did I, how did I, you know. You, the followers, can all think, oh, I would have done it better, why have they changed their mind, oh, I wouldn't have done that, you know. But after that 5 minutes, new page, you keep going. And so therefore you let off steam. In effect, it's letting off steam. It's allowing those irrational thoughts. You know, when you come home from work and you sometimes say to your partner, oh God, I had the most awful day. I had to work with so-and-so and I can't stand working with them. And your partner will be like, well, have you thought about, and you know, I don't want any advice. I just want to be irrational. Or even about your partner to your mates when you go, oh, no, God, why did I marry them? Oh my goodness. You're not actually saying that. We might be sometimes, but you're not saying that. Really, you're just going blur. And that blur is the most important thing we can do in our lives. But it's about creating a safe environment where you're not judged for that blur. You know, that 5-minute moment is a safe environment. You don't judge someone.
So would you say it out loud then? So were you encouraged, if, let's say, for example, you were leading, you made a mistake. Could I literally just be like, Victoria, why the hell did you do that? And were you expected to respond, or were you just expected to take it? Like, how? Because I think this is fascinating. I think it's really, really good. And it's like, I think the more you're talking about this, and as you sort of mentioned here, to actually get it out is so powerful, because if you don't, it sits there, it festers and it grows, and that small little molehill becomes a massive, huge mountain. And this happens in relationships, it comes with anything. It's like, again, I'll add to my list of things that people struggle with, is it, like I said, communication. To actually have an open, honest conversation with someone. Because me and Mikey have done this loads of times where something's not quite gone right. We have a conversation about it, and we both know we're on the same path, we're on the same goal, like you guys there. Yeah. We're trying to stay alive, move forward. You get it out. Okay, cool. Like, there's no issue.
Not
there.
Judging.
No. It's like,
judge.
I'm not taking this personally. Like, Mikey's not saying this about me. It's like, no. Listen to what he's saying. Okay, cool. Okay, brilliant. Right, okay, cool. Yeah, I can take that. That stings a little bit. Right, a little bit of a breath. Right, let's crack on. Let's move on. And then that's it. You put it behind you, lay it to bed, rather than sat there thinking, God. And then you kind of just build it in your head. You tell that story, that narrative. You catastrophize it. So yeah, so talk to me about the process a bit more. Like, is it so? Were you encouraged? I sort of went off a bit of a tangent there. Were you encouraged to actually verbalize it? And then what did the leader have to do with that feedback?
So yes, but not necessarily minute by minute. So we didn't stop after each pressure, each change of direction, or each whatever. But in the tent at night, you were encouraged to talk about how your day was. So, you know, I don't know if I can't remember if I said at the beginning, but when I applied, my mother also applied.
No, you missed that out, but I knew that part, but no, yeah. So I'm glad you had that in.
So she used to drive me absolutely mad every evening. So the guides, so we had 2 guides who, you know, guided us the whole way. And they would say each night, how are you feeling out of 10? Which seemed as, you know, oh God, they're going to go again. But actually, it was really important for them to understand how you were. I would be 5, 6, 7, 8, depending on how I felt. Mum would always be 11 out of 10. And it drove me mad. She still does it to this day. And I'm like, you cannot always be 11 out of 10. And she said, well, yes, I was, because, you know, I let this stuff wash over me, not in a ignorant, naive way, but I don't hold things. And hence you can see my upbringing. But in the 10, I would sometimes be, I just had it up to here with so and so, but you wouldn't say it like that. You know, you were still diplomatic. We did have, you know, big arguments. There were a couple of times, especially towards the end of the expedition, when we were all a little bit tight and uptight and scared and stuff. And one of the team members said to me one day, well, I don't know why you're so upset. It's not that difficult. And I was like, so again, I'm trying to explain, we're all human still, you know, so those guidelines and rules, they don't apply every second of every day. That's just not normal. But it's not letting yourself kind of, oh gosh, oh woe is me when you break the rules.
Be consumed by it, and then it ruin everything, and then for everyone else. Things, as I said, it's just a principle there that wants to really.
You just address it somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere. Yeah. Like again, so with your partner and you're out at a family event, you don't start shaming them and going nuts and go, yeah, well, I'm just getting my 5 minutes out. It's like, no, actually, when you're at home, the kids are out of the way. Actually, just have again, as you sort of mentioned, diplomatic conversation with respect, because at the end of the day, if you go into an argument and you're becoming very, very aggressive, instantly the person get the backup. If you can do it in an actual articulate manner to really express what you mean, then actually you can move forward with that information.
But just again, the message I keep on saying, it doesn't always work perfectly. So
no.
But if my husband was listening to this, he would say, you've just said absolute rubbish. He would tell me that I do go in for the kills sometimes.
But again, even then, the thing, when you're going for the kill, it's then your husband then understanding what she actually really saying. So that's not then on your husband to be like, when you're going and you're mad, like, I must have done something here that's made the. So for me,
it's never his fault. But we digress into a marital podcast.
Oh yeah, just move it on. Get all the relationship experts back on. So I'm not sure where this story fits in, but I heard you mention it on a podcast. I wanted to dive into it because, as I mentioned, when I heard it, I was a bit like, it sounded like you nearly died. So talk to me about when you and your mum fell in water. I don't know what part this is. I don't know what actually happened. I just heard you mention it. And it sounded quite bad. So I just wanted to ask you this and see where we go with it.
Yeah. So yeah, it was bad. So we'd had a storm. It was about 2/3 of the way through the expedition. And the ice conditions as a result of this big storm were really rough. And you could see.
Can you talk to me about this storm? Like, can you paint a picture? Because as soon as you said storm, I'm thinking storm outside, thunderstorms. Can you actually paint a picture for my audience about what we're actually talking about here? Because I imagine it's absolutely terrifies. Can you really try and like, paint a picture about that?
Yeah. Okay. So we would have raided into base camp. They would have warned us that there was a storm coming. So we would have continued to go north until the weather conditions would dictate it's not safe. So by that, too much wind, zero visibility. There's too much wind means you can't really put up your tent. It's okay once your tent is up, kind of put up your tent is not safe. On another expedition, myself and one girl, we were just together. Our tent blew away in a storm. We were left in the middle of the Arctic with no tent. So these things do happen. So we the weather conditions were such that we couldn't continue walking north. So we pitched our tent. You have what's called a valance, so like a sheet that goes out all around the tent, and you load loads and loads of ice and snow onto it to hold it down, because you don't have a ground sheet with your tent, because everything is about weight. So you want minimum weight to carry in your sledges. So the tent, in theory, could just take off if that valance didn't have enough weight on it. So you're all in your tent. You can hear the wind howling, and obviously the tent's flapping and everything. You don't get rain like in Britain. It's a desert, so I mean there's a very occasional bits of rain, but there's no. It's a really, really dry place to be, bizarrely. But so the wind would be noisy, but also you would hear all these gunshots, which are ice cracking. So on a normal day, when you go to bed at night, I say night, it's 24 hours daylight, but you go to bed at night, you put your sleeping bag on the ice and you lie, and you roll up one of your bits of clothing as a pillow. But through the ice, you can hear the creaking and the groaning and the movement, a bit like when you're in a boat and you can hear a boat kind of moving if you go below deck. Lying on the ice at night, you could hear all this cracking and groaning. And so you would know what okay movement sounded like. When you were in a storm, there were gunshots going off the whole time as this ice would crack, and then these massive rumbling noises, which is when, instead of opening up, which is the gunshot noise, the crashing together noise is like a tube train coming out of a tunnel. So you'd hear all these noises all around you. You were permanently terrified that the tent was going to blow away. And you weren't allowed really out of your tent. You had to wee in the tent. You couldn't go out the door, all those kind of things. So it was, after 24 hours of being cooped up, you're also very cold, because your tent is normally kept warm, so to speak, by about 0 degrees, because you're burning fuel to melt snow and ice for cooking and drinking. And you burn your cookers for 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening. And that gives you, for your awake hours, a bit of warmth. And then you sleep for the other bit. But when you have a storm day, you're sitting for all the hours you would normally walk, you're sitting in minus 40 degrees, basically, because the tent doesn't keep you warm. So you are fed up at the end of a storm day, absolutely fed up. So after this 24, 36 hours, conditions were clearly completely different. There was no blue sky. The visibility wasn't great. The ice was really kind of mushed up, cracked. It wasn't, not that it ever is smooth, but it really was. We called it the Great Wall of China. It was just lumps everywhere and open water everywhere. But we could see a potential route going north-ish. I mean, you never go north. That would be too straightforward, too easy. And so we were walking, skiing, and we got to a point where the ice wasn't great, but again, I always liken it, how often do you actually walk half a mile to go to a pedestrian crossing, when actually, as long as you're sensible and safe, you could cross it just here, the road. Mm-hmm. It was that kind of decision. It wasn't a dangerous decision. It was a calculated risk decision. So we got to a bit of ice. We decided to cross this area, and Mum was in front of me, and she literally, in front of my eyes, just disappeared from view. She just dropped into the ocean like a rock. She just went boom, because the ice just opened up underneath her. So she dropped in, attached to skis, sledge, boots, ski poles, everything. I leant on my sledge to try and get her, and my sledge tipped over. So I was in the water too, both of us attached, with the ice opening and opening and opening and opening. The team was separated. One of the guides was over there, the other guide plus the other two members were over there. So we were all separated, equipment everywhere, etc. And at that point, you can't just dial 999. You know, you are 18 hours from base camp, assuming the pilots have flying hours, there's somewhere for a plane to land, and there's visibility. So none of that applied. And even at base camp, you're then another 12, 15 hours from a half decent hospital halfway down Canada. So there is no get out of the jail card. It goes back to that mindset bit. It doesn't mean it's easy, but you've got to have the mindset of, okay, there's a bloody big obstacle now in front of me. I've got to really break this down. So you don't think that, obviously, when it's all happening.
Did you think that you were going to die at that moment? Was there a sense of impending doom of this could literally be it? Because I mean, that's not like, we're not talking about here like that's warm water. That is absolutely freezing cold water after you've just been in the snow. So you're mentally and physically exhausted, and then you've just literally gone into an ice bath essentially, and everything's moving away. So did you sense impending doom, or had you just had that thing of like, how the hell am I going to get out of this?
It was complete the latter. It was all about what I call kind of that military mindset of, I've got to get off the battlefield. We know that we were swimming for 8 or 9 minutes, Mum and I trying to unclip our sledges, kick off our skis, etc., desperately trying to get onto ice floes. But they kept on breaking or moving away. To answer your question, the only time I thought that was when we, at one point, were both sitting on an ice floe, but still with the water moving and opening. And I remember thinking, and it sounds flippant, but it wasn't at the time, oh my God, Dad's going to kill me. It was the only thing I thought was at that moment, because my mother, what I hadn't said was, before Mum had applied for the expedition, she'd had breast cancer, had a mastectomy only a few weeks previously. And she had applied because she didn't want cancer to define her. And she was like, well, again, you know, what's the worst that can happen? I've had this with cancer, so actually North Pole is nothing in comparison. But at that moment, I was like, oh my God, Dad really is good. If he knew this, he would have a fit. But then you go back into survival mode again. And really, for the next 5-6 hours, it was survival mode. It was all about, because you've got no spare clothing, no spare equipment, nothing. What you wear is it. You have 2 or 3 pairs of gloves, 2 or 3 hats, but your suit is it. Because again, weight is of the essence. So we had to get moving. Once we eventually got onto dry land, we had to get moving to try and warm our bodies up. We were wearing our wet clothes. We'd missing, Mum had no ski boots. She'd kicked them off and they'd got lost. So we just put a stuff sack over her feet like a plastic bag. She was walking basically barefoot in effect. We eventually, long story, but eventually managed to meet up with the other half of the team. But it was a few hours. And then it was about getting us to as dry as possible. So putting us into a sleeping bag. You can't dry the clothes, there's no tumble dryer. So you put the clothes outside and they kind of freeze dry-ish.
That sounds absolutely grim. That sounds awful. That sounds, I'm just picturing this now, thinking if I'm in wet clothes and I've got to carry on walking in wet clothes, and then the only way to dry them is to freeze dry them and have to put them back on.
And they never dry properly.
Oh.
Yes. Yeah. You've got it in one, because each night they would, as we carried on wearing these clothes for good 10 days after. So each night you would freeze dry the suit because they were still wet. Each morning you would pick it up and you'd bash off as much of the new ice that had formed from the kind of moisture. But then during the day it would melt and we would have steam coming off us as the moisture just kept on melting. It was horrible. And then one of the guides also went back to where the accident had happened. She'd managed to work out roughly where it was, and incredibly, all the equipment's designed to float. Everything bar 2 ski poles floated to the surface and froze. So with a pickaxe and a rope, she was able to rescue all the equipment bar 2 ski poles. So we kept going again, we had no choice. We then kept going, kept heading north, but a bit more wobbly there.
Like when again, it was another podcast that I heard you on, and I just heard that story, and it kind of got like brushed. I was a bit like, that sounds really interesting, and I genuinely can't believe that wasn't explored, because that is absolutely fascinating. Again, I'm really glad. Thank you very much, by the way, for painting that picture, because like I said, when you said about storm, I'm literally then was put myself in this basically tent. Yes, it's quite daytime, but still nighttime, and just the noises and the complete uncertainty of
very
that for me
noisy
would,
place.
yeah, like, am I actually going to get out of this situation right now, let alone the rest of it? And then going from that tired, cold, to then going into the water, that is pretty bizarre. That is, have you actually stopped to think about how close you came to dying in that moment? I know it sounds a bit weird, but that's
No,
for me. When you listen, when I'm listening to that terrifies me for you, and I wasn't even there.
It's bizarre. Yes, when I get, not day to day, and we never had therapy or anything after. I mean, it didn't exist. That didn't happen those days. But the times when I do, when I'm particularly stressed, or I had a very difficult time with work during COVID. I was running a business and it was sold and everyone had been made redundant, all those kind of things. I had a lot of nightmares at that time, didn't sleep very well. And the biggest nightmare was always my sledge not being able to detach it, and the sledge pulling me down and the ice closing up. So that's, I always know I'm stressed if I have that nightmare. And then the other one is I do a lot of downhill skiing, and I'm not very good, but I love it. But sometimes if you go in the kind of the Easter time, which is obviously school holidays, the snow's melted and you see lots of bits of open water as you go near rivers and streams. And when I see snow, ice and dark open water, I get kind of really bad collywobbles in my stomach, and I kind of go, and I tend to kind of seize up a bit, which is pathetic because the stream is probably about that deep. But it gives me that flashback.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You say it's pathetic. It's not, because like I said, it's just that's something, as you sort of said, you didn't have time in the moment to process it. And because again, you have to still keep moving forward. But that's, again, a very traumatic experience. And not only did you go through it yourself, like the thought of actually, it's like watching a movie. I'm sure in my head, I've got a picture of some Lord of the Rings, where basically someone's walking, they just disappear in front. I'm sure there's a scene like that in Lord of the Rings, but it's like just literally, they're like, and not even just a person, that's your mum. So then you go from that, and then you end up there as well. I think the whole thing is, yeah, I've got very, very vivid in my head of that. So again, it means you did a good job of telling that story. So that was fantastic. Obviously, you made it back safe. Amazing. So what did this whole thing, what did it actually teach you about yourself? Because that, for me, you've kind of gone in there with a strong mindset anyway. You've gone in there, you're quite a resilient person. You've got that whole, like, we should keep moving forward mentality, obstacle, break it down. Did it teach you anything new being in that situation? Not just specifically falling in the water. I'm talking about the whole experience in general.
I think for the first few years after, probably not, well, not that I had thought about. So, you know, when we first got back, it was all very exciting and we were famous and on the news and it was all great. Then I went into normal life, got married, you know, life carried on, and, you know, ups and downs, and obviously those lessons were carried through. But I think actually it was, and again, it was a retrospective, but during COVID, so I was MD of an EdTech business, our owners sold us. So I knew it was coming before COVID started, but I couldn't say anything to anyone, obviously. Then in the middle of COVID, the new owners took over. They made pretty much all of us redundant. So I had to make everyone redundant. These are people, very small family business. And, you know, these are people who are like my family. And I knew that by making them redundant, I was completely screwing up their lives. And then eventually it was my turn to make myself redundant. And I had a 6-month period where I was at absolute rock bottom. I couldn't think straight. I was stressy, you know, all those thoughts. So it wasn't a 5-minute moan, it was a 6-month moan. But gradually, I was able to process it, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was using those lessons from childhood, from A levels, from the Arctic, to not look at it as, oh my God, I've got to get a job that earned what I did before and the same status as it was before. It was, okay, well, as long as I can put bread and milk on the table. Okay, so as long as I can be there and be present and be vaguely smiley for my husband and my son, you know, and all those bits, and gradually I built myself back up again, and was then able to kind of reflect and think, right, these are the life lessons. This is what I've always wanted to do, is go forth and tell everyone all these lessons. And so bizarrely, I have, set up now a business based on that, on those lessons of resilience and perspective and coping with change. And it's okay to feel grotty, angry, upset. But I didn't realize any of that at the time. I suppose it was just like, oh, well, okay, I've done something quite cool here. And I've done various things afterwards. I've said yes to lots of other things, but the lessons learned, and it goes back to what we said, people don't always realize they're resilient because we're not taught that reflective skill, that experiences skill. And it was only when I had this 6-month hiatus where I had no work, I felt sorry for myself, self-worth was rock bottom, that I began to reflect on those lessons, those lived experiences, and actually, I'm alive. Therefore, I'm successful in the fact that I'm even alive. I'm getting out of bed.
I think that's one of you've hit a few little golden nuggets I want to try and pick with this. Normally I take notes, but I was actually quite gross to what you're saying. So hopefully I remember everything that you said. So if I misquote it, come back to me. One of the biggest things there is about hitting rock bottom and then kind of breaking it down in small steps. I think that's such a big thing, because so many people, when they are feeling that way, as you spoke about before, they see a massive giant slab of whatever is in front of them. So no, right, what can you do to just, I call it winning the day. What can you do to just win today? They're just small little steps. And then if you can, make it about somebody else. So if you're struggling again with that self-worth, like you said, right, I've got to look after my kid. Okay, whatever it is, like put food on the table. Rather than sort of going inwards a little bit, if you're really struggling that much, that can be quite painful when you're at rock bottom. That's probably not the time to be reflecting. It's like, if you make it a little bit about yourself. So for me, when I was struggling with depression, I then went to work in a pub. So to get myself out of it, because then it kind of forced me.
Distracts you.
Yeah, it distracts me. It forced me to kind of be kind of happy. And then the more I then actually started to open up and talk, that was then when I was able to work through it. You then also said something else, if I can remember off the top of my head. Hopefully the university is just going to let it come to me. You then said something else about, that was it, the reflective part. So when it comes to reflecting on it, as you mentioned, it's life happens for us, not to us. So in that situation there where you did hit rock bottom in that 6 months, you needed that to actually build who you were now and to actually reflect on all the stuff that you've done. Because if you didn't have that rock bottom 6 months, you probably never would have really reflected on it and be the person that you are now, sharing all this wisdom. So I think it's really important that, as you said, reflection is such a key thing. But when you are struggling and at rock bottom, that is not the time to reflect. You have to get yourself with a foothold of the situation first. But this is the key part that people don't do, is you then do need to reflect on, what have you actually done with your life? Where has it gone wrong? What responsibility can you take? What things would you change? And who do you want to be moving forward? And that's basically essentially what you just did there. Like, you had all this amazing stuff behind you, but it's like, okay, well, now who do I want to be? And then like, well, actually, I want to talk about this stuff. Cool. And now you're now doing it. But if you hadn't had the conversation with yourself, you wouldn't be doing it. And I think it's a fascinating thing. You just drop little nuggets there. And hopefully I digested them all. So I dissected them all, because there was such little golden nuggets you said that. I don't really think you realized what you were saying. I'm like, this is really good.
Yeah, and you don't realize it. I don't think we do realize it at the time. But I'm a massive, massive believer that just lifting up the duvet in the morning warrants a tick on your checklist, your to-do list. A tick doesn't need to be, I submitted a 30-page strategic document, or I submitted my A-level coursework. A tick is lifting up the duvet in the morning. Now, eventually that duvet action becomes habit, and therefore it doesn't need a daily tick. But then the tick may be, if I don't know, let's say you want to lose weight and you start to do exercise. It's not, I need to run. That's why the couch to 5K thing is brilliant. It's not about running 5K. It's about walking to the end of your garden and back, or walking to the stop and back. And that's what I think we just have to tell everyone, that success, and the worst thing I can ever do is someone come away and say, oh, well, I could never be as successful as you because I couldn't go to the North Pole. The North Pole is irrelevant. It's just an example story. Everyone has their own, lifting up the duvet moment, whether it's the North Pole size or lifting up the duvet, everybody has 3 or 4 things a day which they can put a tick on and should make them stand tall. Is really important.
I think a big thing. I think there's a it's an old US Navy Marine person. I can't remember, butchered who he was always, but basically talk about making the bed in the morning and how important it is. Because if you just wake up every morning and make the bed, that's one thing you've accomplished. Yeah. And even if you accomplish nothing else for the rest of the day, at least you've accomplished that one thing. And sometimes when you're at rock bottom and you don't want to get out of bed, as you said, just lifting the duvet is a win, and actually then making the bed, that's 2 wins. And it can take you 5 minutes, and at least you've done 2 things.
Exactly.
And then slowly that builds that confidence back up that you aren't useless and you can't achieve anything because you've actually achieved something. And people are like, that's also making the bed. Yeah, but how many people don't make their bed? Like, so again, yes, it might seem small and insignificant, but again, it's taking the principles of it to then just slowly build it back up again. Genuinely, this has been fascinating. I'm so glad we went there with the Arctic story, because again, I know you've probably done it to death, but I really want to kind of just dive into some of this, like more, what's the word? Dangerous side of things, and I wanted to try and get you to think more about how you were feeling in that moment, if that makes sense. And I'm glad you sort of went there about that near-death experience, because it's absolutely fascinating for me. Where can people find out more information about you? Before we go there, I didn't mean to go to that question. The question I meant to ask was, if someone was, see, I told you all make mistakes, learn from it. It's a question I ask all my guests. What bit of advice would you give to somebody right now? We've kind of hit on it, but so I don't want you to use what we just said. What advice would you give to somebody right now that feels stuck and out of control with their life? Apart from pulling the
use what I've already said. That's not fair. And I said that you changed the goalpost now. Okay, you're not alone. And we hear that the whole time. Everyone says that. You hear it all over the news, and it's like, I am alone. I suppose I would say that verbalizing, think of that 5-minute moan. Now, if you are alone, genuinely, there will be people listening to this who don't have someone they can feel they don't have someone they can go to. Talk to the gatepost, talk to the dog, verbalize it to the mirror, verbalize it to anyone or anything. Because verbalizing, speaking, massively helps you process it. And I believe, and again, all my I believes, and none of them are theoretical, they're all from my own experience. I believe that by verbalizing, you don't solve it, but you start to see the bits of the jigsaw, you see the ice floes or the pebbles, whichever analogy we want. And you can then pick a pebble to address that day and think, right, that pebble is lifting up the duvet. So yeah, I would say you're not alone. Even if you feel you are, you've still got a gatepost or a dog or anything. There's always something you can talk to. Even if you look a bit stupid, it doesn't matter. Because that helps you break it down. Because really, I think the most important bit of advice is step by step or pebble by pebble or whatever it is. But don't look at the whole goal. Don't look at passing exams, getting a job, buying a house. It's pebble by pebble, step by step. And then you can tick things off, literally or not. So, yeah, that'd be my advice.
I genuinely absolutely love that. And I love what we said about vocalizing as well. I think it's such a key thing, because as I sort of mentioned, when I started working in the pub, I put myself in that situation. I ended up meeting somebody that saw straight through this mask I was wearing, and she basically got me to open up. And it's the first person I've actually tried to verbalize how I was feeling to, and just the actual art of talking for that first time about how I was feeling was a massive weight on my shoulders. And I think the first thing, like, if you don't have someone to talk to, even talking to yourself it's going to be so huge, because you're actually admitting it to yourself that you aren't okay. And then, as you said, you can verbalize it, or again, after you verbalize it, maybe write it down, and you can then see, right, here's this massive wall in front of me, but there's all the little pebbles. Right, what's one pebble I can just kick over? And again, it's just real. We all do this. Everyone's done this, where you say something, you think it in your head, and as soon as you think it, you're like, well, that was stupid, or I know the answer to that, or whatever it is. We do, and it's the same thing when you're struggling with your mental health and your mindset. Just talk it out loud, because then you see it totally differently, and then you might come up with, oh, I know the answer to that. Well, of course, why didn't I think of that? Well, the problem is it's really hard to think inside your own head. So get outside of your own head. And
the other thing is, if you are someone has come to talk to, if you're the listener, it's really hard, because I'm a solution person, But if you have the opportunity and if you have the headspace to remember, before they start talking, say to that person, do you want me just to listen, or do you want me to give you solutions? Ideally, you want to just be the listener and just let them go blah. Even if they say the most stupid thing, the most irrational thing, they say, I'm awful, I'm useless. Don't say, oh, no, you're not. I think you're great, really. That's not what they want to hear at that moment. Let them go blah, and then you can dissect what they're saying. It's a real gift, it's a real art, and it's really hard to do because all of us want to go, oh, I'll help you, I'll hug you.
I heard that off a good friend of mine called Paul Cope, and it's again something I needed to rehear that, because sometimes, like I said, it's really easy to know it, but then to actually do it is really, because again, you do want to help,
really
especially when you know how to help someone. But it's like, have they actually asked for my help, and why do you want to help them? Is it for you, or is it for them? Because most of the time we're doing it more for us and our ego to basically be like, I can help you. When, as you sort of said, that's not what they actually need. So I think that's absolutely fascinating. Victoria, genuinely, this has been incredible. But where can people find out more information about you? If they want to, actually, again, I know you've got a book that you wrote with your mum and stuff. Like, where can people find out all this information about you?
So probably the best place to go is probably, I've got a couple of places. LinkedIn, so from a business perspective, my LinkedIn is Victoria Humphries UK. That's IES Humphries. I've got a website, Anything Is Possible. .co.uk, and then our book, rather dodgy title, but it's Frigid Women. You can get that on Amazon, or if you really want, you can get it on eBay for about a penny, I think. But Amazon.
Love that. Honestly, I'd like to say thank you very much for being so open and honest there again, especially about some stuff you went through. And again, I know especially something that was quite traumatic, to go back there. It's absolutely fantastic, and I know my audience have taken loads of value. So thank you very much for today.
It's been brilliant. I've really enjoyed it. You've taken me places where I haven't, I don't often speak. So thank you. It's been good, really good.
Thank you.